Hello and welcome to another session of Knowledge Labs. This is episode 6 of wonderful photographers and creators that we're bringing to you to learn from the best, depending on what their skill sets are. And today we have a wonderful guest. We have Scott Markewitz here, one of the most renowned outdoor and sports photographers in the entire world. So welcome, Scott.
Well, thank you, Andrei. Great to be here.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
How are you, before we get going, and again, I won't spend too much time on this, but how are you holding up with all this madness of COVID and everything? How's things been on your end?
It's been surprisingly good. Like when COVID first hit, things shut off completely for a while. So there was a couple months that were pretty scary, but then gradually things have picked up and I've been able to maintain a pretty steady workflow, and it's been all right. Obviously traveling's a little nerve wracking, but we make the best of it, and overall can't complain too much.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I would think I travel a great deal myself, and I've not really done a tremendous amount of traveling for obvious reasons. But I don't know. It's just been some people are either incredibly busy with what's happening, or some people are just completely shut off. So I was curious. Obviously, given what you're doing, where it's a lot more outdoors, and you don't need from what I can gather, you don't need a gigantic team around you. I would think that your stuff probably picked up or stayed pretty consistent.
Exactly. I think being outdoors obviously is, you're much safer, and I'm dealing with smaller crews. I've heard stories of, big sets in, places like California where they've got, COVID testing every day, and,
Yep, we're still living through it.
And it's kind of a nightmare. But for what I do, I feel, relatively safe compared to a lot of other productions for sure. But the risk is always there because I'm, jumping on planes. I just got back from Iceland a week or two ago, and
I was in Iceland 2 weeks ago.
Oh, no way.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. You stuck to the south, can I assume?
We were, within striking range of Reykjavik. We went into the highlands for a few days, but
nice.
We were pretty close. And the coolest thing was, did you get out to the volcano?
Oh, I absolutely did. We went there obviously with the midnight sun. You don't really get that sort of contrast as much. So we went at around 1 a.m. We started our hike at around midnight, and we got to the spot where we wanted to at around 2 o'clock. So it was about 2.5 hour hike, but we decided to actually go all the way out to the far end. So we hiked another hour from that spot, just to try and get closer. But the weather was pretty brutal. It was lashing sideways. The winds were pretty horrendous, but we got a great view of it. I just couldn't. It wasn't the right conditions to photograph it. I don't know how it was for you.
Oh, it was perfect. It was like,
damn it!
We started hiking at like 9 o'clock. Maybe we were there a little later in the season than you, but we started hiking at 9. Like it was still fairly light, and we went right out to the end too. But it was like this beautiful sunset for a couple hours, and the volcano was like perfectly clear, and it was just a plume of smoke going straight up. It wasn't smoking out the valley. And, great shots. It was definitely an experience of a lifetime.
Yeah, we wanted to hike a little bit later, and also we were coming back from Selfoss. We were originally all the way out in Vic, so we traveled all that entire day, so we didn't have as much time. But anyway, off the topic a little bit in some ways. But for people that don't know who you are, let's just say the crazy out there that have never heard of you, how would you describe what you do, who you are, how long you've been doing this? Give us your spiel.
Well, I've been, I guess let's go back to the beginning. I got into this game from the other side of the camera. I was a pro skier in my former life, and working with a lot of the photographers, in that day, and just, really enjoyed the whole aspect of it, and bought a camera and started shooting myself. So I originally started out in the ski world, and then branched out into mountain biking, other outdoor sports, and lifestyle and things like that. And I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I've had over 500 magazine covers and countless ads.
I read that. That's insane. And I mean, how many people can say they've had 1 or 2 magazine covers? You've had over 500. That's an achievement that's going to be hard to beat. So there's a reason why you're one of the best, if not the best in the world. So
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
It's a great adventure, and I really, obviously love what I do, and I feel really fortunate to be able to turn it into a career for this long, and still getting after it. And every time I go out and shoot, I just love it, and can't wait for the next time. So,
Are you an Atomic, Head, Fisher? What skier are you?
I've been big on Solomon and Vocal for many years. Those are two of my main clients. So
Interesting.
been,
I've been Atomic I've been skiing myself since I was a kid, so I've been Atomic all the way through. I would stick to a brand. I do a lot of research, and I tend to stick to that. And that's one of my faults, I guess.
great. I mean, there's so many great skis out now. You can't really go wrong.
Yeah,
Especially
Technology. I feel like technology has moved a tremendous amount, probably since when you first started getting onto skis.
Oh yeah, it's incredible going from skinny 200 centimeter skis to fat 180s that just turn so easy and carve through anything and ski any condition. It's amazing.
It was kind of frustrating because we go skiing quite a bit, and I just got new skis right as COVID hit. So I think I've skied maybe 2-3 days on them. There were the new Atomic Redsters that I absolutely adore and love. But again, slightly getting off topic. Probably one of the best things for us to be able to do is to maybe show us some of the work that you have, and I'm sure you have stories about each of the images and kind of your process and how you go about capturing these wonderful moments. So if you wouldn't mind giving a quick share, and
I'll share my screen with everyone here.
Yeah. There we go. Fantastic.
I guess I'll just start with this. I call this no bad light. And I think that goes back to like sort of my approach to photography in general. Like there really is no bad light. I heard for years, you go out with photographers and they'd be like, oh, the light's really bad today. And, I kind of take the approach, well, there really is no bad light. It's really how you approach it and look at it and learn to work with it. And I remember Outer Magazine asked me years ago for a quote, and I said, there is no bad light. So I've always lived by that motto and tried to make the best of, whatever situation I'm in. So here I'll start with.
Well, actually, if I may just ask a question about that, because I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. Because I've obviously heard a lot of photographers talking about light. Oh goodness, my cats. Obviously, light is crucial. We live as photographers. We live and chase the light everywhere. How did you find the light in Iceland during the midnight sun? When I was there, it was very cloudy, so the light was incredibly flat. There was just not much going on with it. And I had to make that decision to just turn everything into infrared. So you adapt, you see what's going on and you make those changes. What kind of changes have you had to make if let's say the lighting isn't the perfect one that you were looking for?
Well, I think every situation's different. Like going back to Iceland, we had a lot of cloudy days too, and even some rain. But, for instance, out in the highlands, it's cloudy, it's moody. It kind of accentuates the almost somber feeling of the landscape out there and makes it even more dramatic in a way. If it's bright and sunny, sometimes you lose those green, vibrant colors in the landscape. So the clouds actually play to your advantage in a way. So it's really learning to look at it that way. Like you think, oh, the light's not that great, but actually it creates a mood that actually works pretty well.
Copy that. Understood. Fully agreed. Well, that's an interesting shot. It almost looks like a helicopter.
Yeah, it's actually a skier. And the story of this shot, this was a shot that I saw in my mind's eye like 2 days earlier. This is from Girdwood, Alaska, on a shoot with Matchstick Productions several years ago. And we were out in this zone, the skiing wasn't very good. So what you do on those kind of situations is you go find zones and build jumps. Yeah. So we had this jump built with Mark Abba and a couple other pro skiers, Mike Douglas. And I kept looking over at this ridge, which is what, the shot is, looking at this nice, beautifully lit knoll with a perfectly blue background. And I kept looking over at it all day, and we were on another jump site, but I kept, my eye kept looking over at this, and I was like, every hour or so I was like, hey guys, we got to go build a jump over there. And, I kept saying to the team, yeah, we got to go build a jump over there. So 2 days later, we went back, built this jump. We spent like 5 or 6 hours building the jump. And then, they started hitting it. And, I got back into the position I was at 2 days earlier and got this shot. And it's pretty much exactly the way I saw it in my mind's eye 2 days earlier. So I think it was a real lesson for me. Like, you know, you see it and you try to make it happen, because, you know, this came out exactly as I saw it, which was pretty cool.
Which is also pretty rare,
It is pretty
especially,
rare,
you know,
you know.
it's, you can envision a shot as much as you want, but there are so many external factors, especially when you're outdoors. There's so many external factors that come into play that to be able to achieve exactly what you're looking for, I think that's a rarity.
Yeah.
I love the composition here because it's obviously very minimalistic. You're following the rule of thirds, but it's you know, your eyes being led all the way from the upper left sloping down, like pretty much exactly probably why you had this shot in mind. Is the background, is that actually the sky, or is that actually the other side of a mountain
That's
that
the other side of the
could,
mountain. And
yeah, that's
a couple things
what I
about
see.
this shot, like if you notice, it's a 300 mm lens, so it's really far away,
Yeah,
pulling that background. And even though the skier is really small, so it's probably at least a quarter mile away, maybe more.
yeah,
And just, you know, everything lined up that way. And the cool thing about this, just out of frame, is a mountain ridge. And the way the sun went that time of year, it basically just stayed above the ridge and followed the ridge line for hours. So we had this almost identical light for
constantly.
a few hours. Like, it wasn't really like, normally you'd get in a situation like this and this kind of light would only last like 20 minutes.
Right, right.
But here, it just, the way the sun tracked, it's just stayed on that horizon line like all day and just barely moved. It was pretty incredible.
So just talk us through really quickly in terms of the settings, because I'm a technical shooter, so I always look at numbers. How did you come to the choosing the 300 mil? Did you already have that sort of in mind, given the location that you scouted ahead of time? You knew ahead of time
Yeah,
that
I knew that
300
it
is
was
better
really
than.
far away. I actually, you know, because we had a helicopter to shoot this with, and I got
Yeah.
some great shots from out of the heli looking right above it. But to be able to get in a position for this, I had to take the heli across the valley to get into position. It was that far away. It wasn't
Yeah.
within hiking distance, you know, at least for the time it would have taken. So I knew I needed a really long lens to get this shot because it was so far away. And obviously I wanted to make sure it was in focus. So I picked, you know, f9 just for a good, you know, mid-range, not too shallow depth of field shot, just to
Yeah.
make sure the focus would be sharp on the skier. And then, you know, try to keep
I would
my,
assume you probably just focused on the ramp, because at least that's
yeah, I just focused
stationary and
on
you
the
knew the
jump
skier was
itself.
going to.
Yeah, I knew the
Exactly.
skier would be in that focal plane on the
Yeah.
jump. So I just focused on the jump itself. And I knew that little puff of snow would light up as well, just with the angle, the direction of the sun hitting it. So
Hmm.
I knew that would be a really cool element in this photo as well. And that's, you know, I saw all that in my mind's eye like two days earlier. So
Yeah, that's
it's
an
cool
awesome
to
shot.
like see it and then it happens. It's, like I
Right.
said, it's pretty rare, but this was one of the instances where it worked out exactly as I saw it.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
great shot. I love that one.
Yeah,
All right, on to the next.
still one of my favorites.
Yeah, definitely.
So this one, this is Bobby Brown at the X Games Big Air event in Aspen several years ago.
Hmm.
And I was shooting through this is all like not what you call natural light, but you know, the lighting for the event. So this was, I think the story behind this, you know, I was kind of underneath the jump shooting the traditional, like, you know, wide angle, big air jump, you know, with the night lighting that they had. And I was looking around and there was this stand of aspen trees next to the run that was lit up and they were bright yellow. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm going to run over there and have a look and see what I could find. And, you know, after hiking around in the trees for a bit, I found this little window where you could see the skiers right after they leave the takeoff. The takeoff, the jump is actually literally like just barely out of frame in this image.
Yeah.
So the trajectory put them like right in the middle of that window. And, you know, it's pretty precision shooting. Like you have to line up your camera in exactly the right spot. If you move it, you know, a quarter of an inch, the skier's
Yeah, you're in the trees.
window. So you got to find those windows and really like focus your attention and make sure you're getting the skier in the right spot. And this was one of the frames that worked out really well, just because of his body position as well, with that perfect, you know, skis crossed and
Yeah.
nice X, and you know, it's X Games, so that kind of fits as well. But it's just, you know, it was a unique lighting situation where the trees were lit up you know, with whatever lights they were used, but they were kind of that bright yellow. And
Yeah.
then ears lit up with more the, you know, the event lighting, which was kind of a wider, more, you know, a better lighting for television, basically.
So for those that might be thinking about this in terms of why you chose your settings on your camera the way that you did, obviously you don't have a great deal of light. You need to be as open as you can. So you're on the 120. Was that the Canon lens, the 120? Are
Oh,
you a Canon shooter?
it's an 80 to 200 or 70 to
Oh,
200.
okay.
Sorry, 70 to
Okay.
200.
So your widest is a two-way. So you were at your widest on your lens, and obviously you had to crank up your ISO to be able to get that
Yeah,
much more light to hit the sensor, and obviously still keep that fast shutter speed. Otherwise, he would be blurry.
exactly. You want to
So
keep it as close to 1,000th of a second as possible.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
jumped, you know, to get a little bit of extra light out of it, I dropped it down to 800th. So it's still freezing the skier, especially from this far away where he's pretty small in the
Exactly.
frame. You know,
Yeah.
if it was super tight, 800th, you might see a little bit of motion blur. So, but from this distance, the 800th of a second, you know, freezes him pretty well.
And I think that's something that's really crucial for those that are listening to this is really understanding your camera. You've obviously been doing this for a tremendous amount of time, so you know exactly that when you turn up at a scene and you know that this person is going to be flying through the air pretty quickly with low light, you already have in your mind roughly where your ISO is going to be, where's your f-stop, what's your shutter, and then from then on you just test it. I mean, there's no perfect numbers that or settings that you're going to be getting. You're gonna hit one, see what it looks like, make adjustments as you go to then get the next 2 or 3 shots. So but being able to narrow down those numbers as best as you can is just going to save you for the future. So you don't have to spend, you may not have 50 jumpers to play with. You may only have 10. So using 2 or 3 as a test, and then you get to nail all the other ones. So
Yeah,
definitely understand your settings.
exactly right. And another thing with this is, like, you know, the newer cameras have such great dynamic range. There's a lot
Yeah.
you can do with this in post. So you might, you know, this might have been, you know, slightly underexposed just to keep the ISO from going up too high. But then in post, you can pull it back, you know, a half a stop or a stop, and you get the correct exposure out of it in post rather than doing it, you know, perfectly in your camera. You've got the dynamic range to work with. So if you understand that as well, you have a little more latitude to play with.
And one final thing that's equally important is really understanding, where is this image going to live? Is this going to be printed the size of a billboard, or is it just going to live on the web, or maybe in a magazine, but it's not going to be a gigantic main standout piece. If it's going to be small and printed on a small scale, then 35, 4,000 ISO might be okay. It won't be okay for a billboard. And that's where the dynamic range comes in. I can drop my ISO to an 800, but still have that range in post that I can do it without destructive editing to the image.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, you're correct there. Like the end usage is, you know, is a big factor as well. Like you said, if it's a big billboard where you need it to be super sharp, then you're more limited. But if it's just for social media or a small
Absolutely.
web
Yep.
piece, you can you know, the sky's the limit in a sense. But
And
yeah,
that's why knowing that ahead of time will then affect the way that you shoot it and the settings that you use.
yeah. And then obviously shooting at f2.8, you know, the tree branches get obviously more out of
Out of
focus.
focus. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have to be super precise with your focus on the skier, because a little bit off and then he's going to be out of focus. So,
And that's where the newer cameras again come into their own in terms of tracking. The newer the camera is, the much better focus points that you have to be able to track this, to be able to track the skier. So it's just
in this case, I didn't track the skier. Like I said, the takeoff of this jump is literally right off the edge of the frame.
You knew where it was going to be.
So I focus on the edge of the jump, knowing that he's
Yep.
tracking across that focal plane again, not going in and out of the focal plane.
Now, you did this, was this handheld?
Yeah, this was handheld.
Yeah, which explains why the ISO is a little bit higher and your shutter speed has to be the way that it is. But yes, that's that was going to be one of the questions. Was the previous shot that you had, can I assume that was on a tripod? Was that also handheld?
No, that was handheld.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I really don't use tripods or monopods unless I'm shooting like a 400 or a 600. Anything up to 300, I'll usually handhold.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you can be more precise with your framing, I feel like, especially with action sports, when things are moving so much. If you're on a tripod or a monopod, you're limited. You can't move as quickly. You can't react. But if you're, I used to shoot a lot of ski racing, and I'd, take a 600 out on the hill to shoot like a downhill or something, and then you know where they're going to come around the gate, and you can set up on a tripod and just, your frame is set. It's not going to move. But for this kind of thing where, like I said, a little bit of movement,
Yeah.
you got to be in the right location. So you need to be able to move around and frame up perfectly for each skier. Because also the one thing with events like this is each skier has a different kind of takeoff.
Yeah.
One skier will come like really straight up and high. One skier will kind of scrub off the lip and be a little lower. So once you know who's coming and you know what their takeoff's going to look like, you have to adjust the camera position accordingly. So you have to not only, pay attention to like where the action is, but also know what each skier, what each athlete's going to be doing.
I think for me, when I'm shooting anything that's fast motion, I don't necessarily lock in the camera. I don't keep it fixed on the tripod. I do have the ball head a little bit loosened. So it just allows for me to reduce a little bit of that camera shake, but still be flexible enough that I can make ever so slight incremental adjustments like you were just saying. So if I was to shoot this, maybe if I'm on a mono, it would just give me a little bit more stability, but still allow me to move that ball head depending on where that person's going to be. So that's why I was curious to know if you were fully static or if you were sort of on a tripod, but still be fluid on the tripod, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason, I've just kind of stayed away from tripods and monopods, except when they're absolutely essential. And
there's less weight to carry.
Less weight to carry, and just, you can adapt quicker that way, I feel like, to whatever the situation is.
Understood. All right.
On to the next one.
On to the next. There we go.
And this is a shot from Aspen, Colorado, snowboarder, obviously. And I think what I was looking at here is using that horizon and kind of hiding the sun just barely behind the horizon to really light up the snow and create that effect, that explosive effect of the jump. And I think, the key on this shot for me was really putting the sun in just the right spot, like barely below the horizon. Because if it had been obviously above the horizon, you'd have the sun flare, which, can be a cool effect too. It's not, that's a valid shot, but I wanted to keep it a little cleaner. And then and
it'll blow out your image too.
Yeah, it'll blow out the image. And if you drop the sun too far behind the ridge, then you risk creating a shadow on that snow explosion. So to get a perfectly clean, like, blast of snow right on the edge of the horizon, you got to kind of line up the sun just in the right spot. And besides
from the
that,
three images,
from
the three images I've seen, sorry to interrupt. From the three images that I've seen, it looks like you really enjoy playing with negative space. And I've seen the rest of your work as well. So the positioning of your subjects are very carefully planned. It seems like this isn't just you knew exactly where these people were going to be, and you already had the landscape to then match the human factor. Is that
yeah, that's a good
sort
way
of on the right?
I call it like dynamic tension. So it's not just like, you don't put the subject right in the center. You kind of move things a little bit off center, and you create this tension, like you said, with negative space or some other element in the frame to kind of counteract what's happening with the action. So it creates a bit of dynamic tension. I think it makes the images more interesting, and I definitely, shoot quite a bit that way and really enjoy that sort of feeling you get out of that kind of image.
And again, for those that are questioning the settings, the reason why these are so different compared to the other one is obviously because the subject is very well lit. It looks like it's during the day, more towards the evening. The sun is kind of setting, but there's still plenty of light. So he can be at 1/1000th. You are at f10, so you're trying to get more of that depth of field coming through, and you can lower your ISO to still be able to keep everything sharp. So again, understanding where your light is, where your subject is, what's going to be lit is going to be crucial to then make those adjustments to get the right shot. Because you could have very easily blown this shot out, very easily.
Very easily. And normally I would probably shoot outdoors more at ISO 200, but I wanted to get a little more depth of field just to make everything a little bit sharper and crisper. And also if you look closely, the snowboarder is underexposed, but the overall composition is exposed correctly. So if you were going off a light meter or your in-camera meter, the exposure would be, you'd be underexposed by one stop at least, maybe even close to
Not
two
more.
stops.
Yeah.
That's that blast of snow being lit up sort of compensates for that. So it's an overall exposure that matters, to me. It's not like I'm not exposing for the skier or the snowboarder. I'm exposing for the overall scene. I sort of, it's almost like
And
filling the glass with a perfect amount of water. It's like you're filling your scene with a perfect amount of exposure. There's light and dark elements here that combine together create just the right exposure.
And like you mentioned before, with the newer cameras, that dynamic range will allow you to go in there, even if you're one and a half, two stops under, you can go in there and you can paint them in without destroying the file.
Yeah, and you could even go into Photoshop and paint in the exposure on the snowboarder if you wanted to really play around with it. But this is pretty much as I shot it. So I always try to like nail my exposure as close as possible in camera, just to minimize post production. And I think the images work better in post if they're exposed properly to start with. Obviously, even with a lot of dynamic range to play with, you're still better off nailing the exposure right off the bat.
Could not agree more. I try as much as I can to get everything right in camera as best as possible. It reduces so much retouching time and destroying the image. Before we move on to the next image, I asked this from a few photographers, are you more of the opinion, and again, you're more on the outdoors sports photography type of work that you do you like to expose, do you like to shoot a little bit underexposed or a little bit overexposed? I'm always more exposed to I'm an underexposer by at least a stop, because for me to bring back those highlights is a lot more difficult than for me to lift up the shadows. So I'm curious to know, do you think that way as well?
Yeah, I think that's generally the way to go with most cameras. I've noticed with some different cameras that, like for instance, I've shot both Sony and Nikon. I'm shooting Sony currently, and Nikon was way better in the shadows than in the highlights. So I would underexpose because I could always pull those shadows back. Whereas Sony is a little bit more shifted towards highlights, where you can be a little bit more in the middle, I would say. But yeah, I think generally you want to tend towards underexposure, because you can pull out shadows a lot better than you can pull back overexposed highlights.
Because you do have the new programs now on some of the cameras. I know for Phase, I'm a Phase 1 shooter, and they just introduced the ETTR, the exposure to the right. So they're going as far right as you can without clipping the highlights to then take that shot. But I'd still rather just shoot. I'd rather shoot one or two stops on. Well, two stops is a bit too much. I'd rather shoot about a stop under, just to give myself that range.
I agree. I think that, no matter which camera you've got more detail in the shadows than you do in the highlights. When you're approaching the edges, for sure.
Absolutely. Cool. Awesome. Love the shot.
Cool. Thanks. This is
wide
a shot
lens,
of
very wide lens.
Fisheye, actually. So this is a shot of Brandon Semenuk from the Red Bull Rampage a few years ago. And this shot just came out really cool. He was, I think, pretty sure he was the only athlete jumping this gap, which started on the high left and dropped to low right, as they're looking at it. Pretty crazy gap. And I saw this gap, and one thing that I kind of knew before I was going in there, that the fisheye would create this window effect, because it's not actually a window. It's like a almost
canyon-ish
thing. Yeah. So, but I knew the fisheye would kind of create that window effect from below. The only thing that was a little sketchy about this is that every time he would go off, rocks from the jump would fall down and land right next to me. So I was like getting barraged with rocks. But yeah, this was a pretty cool opportunity for an event photo. I feel like, and Yeah, it's just, I think just
This is,
highlights the, the what you can get out of a fisheye, because sometimes a sometimes a fisheye lens is too distorted and weird looking, but I
yeah.
think this is like an example of where you can use a fisheye lens to create a really cool effect.
And software has gotten better with the keystoning that you can sort of pull that back so it doesn't distort it that massively. But I've never been at this location. It's the first time I'm seeing it. But again, I think it's an interesting point from what we were just talking about on the previous image, which is to me, I would think that you would have had a really hard time with the very bright sky and what it looks like potentially very sort of darker canyon area. It almost looks like you'd have to sort of meter for both almost, and I hate to use the word HDR because I detest the notion of photographers doing overexposing with the HDR concept. But was that a struggle, or was the canyon pretty well lit? Because it looks like it's
The
pretty balanced.
canyon was pretty dark, so I had to find that middle exposure.
Exactly. Yeah.
I definitely played with this image, in Lightroom after the fact to like pull up the shadows in the canyon like as much as possible. Play with the highlights, drop the highlights down in the sky. So, I'd say exposure wise, I was probably somewhere in the middle. The sky was a little bit over and the canyon was a little bit under, obviously. But in post, I pulled that back as much as I can and kind of created this, pretty well balanced image out of it.
So let's really briefly talk about that. What's your post-production process? So you get your image back. Let's just talk about this particular one. So I would think that you probably exposed more for the sky or sort of the middle of the sky. Your canyon was going to be super dark or darker.
Yeah.
What are the first what's your process? What's your first sliders that you're using?
Highlights and shadows for sure.
Yeah.
Like dropping highlights way down and bringing shadows way up. I mean, the one thing you have to be careful of with shadows is you start to get a lot of noise.
Introduce noise.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of finding that balance. You can play with the curves a little bit as well, in addition to the shadows in Lightroom. So you kind of have two tools in the same, you can use on the same image to kind of complement each other. So you can play with the curves, shadow and highlight detail in the curves, as well as this normal, the sliders further up in the menu.
Do you use any lumosity masks?
What's that?
Do you use any lumosity masks that you paint in, or any layers that you do from that perspective?
No, there's no layers in here. It's all done in Lightroom. I definitely added some saturation to get some more color out of the rock, and pull down the blue luminance just to get more detail out of the sky, things like that. Add some orange, add some orange luminance as well, just to pop up the vibrance in the rock,
Yeah. How long would you say you spend on average on an image? I know that obviously varies in complexity. Some of the ski stuff probably doesn't need as much because it doesn't have as much tonality to it.
Lightroom is you can do stuff so quickly, and you can do versions. You can play with an image and then create a version of it and try to do a different, like a black and white version, or like this image has quite a bit of clarity added to it. Things like that. So you can create different versions and play around with it. But I would say, honestly, I probably spent to create this image, separately from other versions, it would probably took me, 5-10 minutes. Because like I said, I'm not playing with masks and doing anything in Photoshop, which is way more time intensive.
All right, awesome. On to the next. If you're done with this one. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. So this is a shot from Lima, Peru. And I was there on a shoot for Specialized with Matt Hunter, and we were riding like the Inca Trail and doing some stuff way up in the mountains. But this was from one of our first days. We were riding one of the trails close to Lima, and it was just kind of through the foothills, and it was, it wasn't really that beautiful, and it was kind of a smoggy, smoky day. But we got to this point where, these converging lines of the far mountains lined up with the point of that little ridge line and the trail kind of coming towards it. It was just a cool
Yeah.
cool example of like all these lines coming together to create a kind of a cool natural composition. And like I said, the original, you know, the lighting situation wasn't that interesting. Like the image on the left is pretty approximate to what it would look like. You know, it was smoggy and,
Yeah.
you know, the ground wasn't that interesting, but you had this trail, which was sort of just worn in and a little bit brighter. So in my, you know, in my mind, I was like, oh, this could be a cool black and white image, which is what we have on the right side. And I think it works much better as a black and white. So there's always that, you know, another way to think about, you know, no bad light, like, you know, the image on the left is okay, but, you know, you would say, well, that's pretty bad light, but in, you know, turn it into a black and white, you have that opportunity to kind of create a pretty cool image out of it. So that was my thinking here. And,
Yeah.
you know, as far as camera settings, pretty basic, you know, 70mm lens, thousandth of a second, 4.5. What's the ISO? It's hidden here.
400.
400, yeah. So, so yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
pretty basic camera settings, but I think it was just a cool example of these like converging lines all coming together to create a really, really cool natural composition. And just, you know, the key is to be on the lookout for those opportunities when they happen, because, you know, they obviously don't always happen where things line up in a cool natural composition just right in front of your eyes, really.
Yeah, and you also bring up an interesting point, which is, I think, for again, for those that are still on here, just because you've taken an image that doesn't necessarily look that great in camera to begin with, give it some time. Play with it a little bit, make it black and white. See if you can bring out more. You know, are there certain sections of this image that you shot that can be a little bit more contrasty, even exaggerated a little bit? You can still salvage an image if you know how to make those adjustments and are willing to be sort of flexible with it. So, because I 100% agree with you that the black and white looks a lot stronger. It sort of looks like a foreign land, whereas the image on the left it definitely has a green hue to it. So again, understanding what you can do not only in camera but also in post, and knowing that ahead of time can really save a shoot.
Sure, and you know, there's many instances where I'll shoot an image thinking more about the post than what it looks like in camera. I'll be like, oh, this would be really cool. Like sometimes I'll take a super wide angle shot and thinking, well, if I crop it and then put it into black and white, I can create a really cool image. So the original might not be that interesting because it's super wide, but, you know, I'm looking at just you know, a section of the frame thinking that's the final image. Or, you know, this shot where it's like it's kind of gray and flat and, you know, not necessarily an ugly image, but not a very interesting image, and then turning into this, you know, pretty cool black and white.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's a great shot.
Yeah, thanks. This one is another example of kind of an effect you can get with a fisheye, like shooting straight up in the trees just creates, it just really magnifies the width of the frame. So you're really pulling like the trees from one side of the frame to the next, like from ground to ground, creates these converging lines. And having the rider jumping straight over me just creates, you know, basically everything's pointing to him, you know, in the middle of the frame. So I think that's a cool composition. Plus it's much brighter behind him. So it almost, you know, highlights the rider in the middle of the frame as well, and creates like a, you know, a darker vignette, you know, natural vignette around it.
Well, and again, just looking at your settings, I would think that you're probably on your back on the forest floor. The trees are quite tight together, which means that it's probably quite dark. He's jumping over you, so covering the only bit of light really that's hitting directly into your sensor. And that's why you have to be at 2.8 to ISO 5000, because any other way, he's going to be exactly. Yeah, he'll be basically blacked out. The only thing you could have possibly done is reduced your shutter speed, but then you're going to get that motion blur coming through. So you had to crank up your ISO to keep that shutter speed up. Yeah, so again, understanding what your final image what you want it to look like is then going to 100% dictate that triangle relationship between ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So these are really great examples of how to be flexible. Don't just stick to one type of setting. You have to adjust according to what your environment is and what you're shooting.
And there's definitely some noise in this image, but it's not, you know, it doesn't take away from it too much. And another advantage of the fisheye is that you know, it's a lot easier to keep it in focus. So shooting a 2.8
Yeah.
is not as tricky as shooting with like a 200 at f2.8. So as long as you're close on your focus, you're going to be pretty much in focus. So because it's really
Yeah, and it pushes,
all about
and
what your eye perceives rather than what's actually there, you know.
exactly, and it's so exaggerated that even, you know, even on the edges of the frame where the trees are with that 16 mil, it's probably not sharp on those edges. I'm sure there's distortion and diffraction coming through. Well, I guess there's some diffraction coming through, but it's the main look and feel of the image that you're going for here. That's why you chose this shot. Would not be possible with a 35 mil. It
No,
would look
absolutely
completely
not.
different. So
It
choose the
wouldn't
right,
be as cool.
exactly, choose the right tool for the shot and the job.
Yeah, because like you said, the edges are definitely out of focus, but
Yeah,
it's really what's leading your eye. You know, where's your eye going in this image, and it's right in the middle
yeah,
of the frame, and it really doesn't matter what's happening on the edges because everything's leading your eye to the center.
exactly. Yep,
So,
absolutely agree.
and this is just an example of like, this was just like a gray, ugly day. You know, no leaves on the trees. You know, there's a little bit of some older leaves, you know, dead leaves on the trees. So, you know, just naturally, this was a pretty ugly scene, but there's some pretty cool action happening. And I thought that, well, let's try a motion blur shot here, a pan blur shot, and see what that does with the with the shapes and textures you get out of it. You know, keep the rider sharp. Then you've got all these trees in front and behind him, you know, creating that motion effect, and the colors kind of actually work, even though that day it was pretty flat, gray, you know, not a very interesting day to shoot. But you know, this image worked pretty well because just by trying something different, creating a little motion, it turned into a pretty interesting image.
Question for you: why would you? And I know exactly what you're going with here. Why would you chose ISO 200? Was that consciously, or why not drop it to as low as possible? Again, because you want to get that motion blur, so you're trying to reduce the light coming in, so you can create that motion blur. Was that and obviously shooting f16, you want to get everything in focus from front to back. Was that a how did you come about to use those settings?
Yeah, I mean, I could have gone with either ISO 100 or 200 in this case, and then it would be you know, 100 would be f11 instead of
Yeah,
f16.
yeah,
But you know, either works. Either, you know, would create the same effect. The focus would be about the same. So yeah, you could go either way. And I don't know if I necessarily made a choice between 200 or 100, or just, you know, had my camera set at 200 and
yeah. Fired it.
F15 worked fine, so I just left it there. And you
Yeah,
know, this was you know, just kind of a quick setup. You know, it probably wasn't
yeah.
really a conscious decision. You know, it was just like, oh, let's try a pan blur here shot because it could be cool, and I just did it, and that's, you know, that's what I got. So
And
probably
again, your composition is
unconscious decision, you know.
right, and the same as all your other images as well. Your composition is not, except for the one in the middle, which makes sense for it to be in the middle with the fisheye. It's, you know, your subject is just slightly off center. There's still a lot of negative space here. Your eye is only drawn to that, to the subject itself. So everything is focused around the athletes, which is what it should be. So yeah, the composition is great on this one. I love it.
Yeah, well, I like how you know, the action's kind of leading you into the frame. It just has a little bit more. If I had put him in the middle, it would be a little bit more of a static shot. And I think just keeping him slightly off center just creates a little
Yeah,
bit more of that like dynamic tension. It kind of it just creates a little bit more of a motion feeling.
forward motion. Yeah,
Forward motion feels like you're going somewhere, right?
right, exactly. Yep.
But yeah, otherwise, you know, this is pretty basic, you know, pan blur shot, but you know, kind of a cool effect. Like there's actually trees in front of him and behind him, so you can see some of the streaks over him. But I think that kind of adds to the motion, so it's not just a
The
rider with
blurriness. Yep.
a blurred background. It's a blurred foreground and background.
Hmm.
So
Awesome.
And this one, obviously just kind of a really cool composition of black and white shapes, and just, I knew this would be a really cool opportunity because I was in Sun Valley heli skiing. And I had the opportunity to shoot out of the helicopter. And I knew like skiing through the burn would just create these really cool shadows and shapes. And this was just almost a lucky frame, really, just because you see how the skier tracks line up almost perfectly next to each other.
The other one, yeah.
And the skier is like, the shadow is perfectly in that little V, a little sharp V, with a little puff of snow behind her. So all these things lined up, and it's almost, that's almost luck to really get it framed, that well. With the skier in that position, with that shadow lined up in that V, and the tracks lining up, and just the way the tree shadows and everything, created this composition. It was because there were many other shots I shot that day from the heli, which are super cool. They're great, but this was just one of those frames that you get every once in a while that just like everything hits
Lines up
perfectly in sync. And, it's not that it's
well, and you're
not necessarily luck, but you shoot enough and you're going to get those kind of frames every once in a while, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that you're on a 58 mil, which leads me to believe that you are actually pretty low, hovering over this. You're definitely not far away.
Yeah, the heli's
knowing that mil.
The heli's actually moving, which
Yep.
is one of the challenges of shooting out of a helicopter. It rarely hovers, so it's always moving. So you're always, the helicopter's moving. You're moving your camera, kind of like trying to rotate with the way the heli's spinning around and trying to follow the skier. So you have to kind of pull yourself out of the
Seat?
out of this. No, well, you just kind of have to pull your mind out of, instead of just focusing on the picture, and kind of like really pay attention to what's happening in the whole composition and not get focused on the skier too much. Really like try to visualize the whole scene as the heli's spinning around and your camera's moving. And it's a pretty dynamic shooting situation, but
I've spent hundreds of hours in planes and helicopters. I presume this was with the doors off.
Yeah, doors off, or doors open, at least. I don't know if it was a slider or whatever, but yeah, doors off.
And you
hanging out of the side of the heli.
Yep, and you have a perfect perfect positioning in terms of composition, where it's in lower right. For those that are loving the rule of thirds, which should be encouraged, but not always as a general rule, just obviously dependent on the situation. But it definitely frames up nicely with the other tracks. Again, leading lines, I think, are really, really important in this frame.
Yeah, you've got, the cross lines from the shadows of the trees, and then the parallel ski tracks kind of breaking it up into, like you got thirds that way, you got the skier in the lower third.
Exactly,
You've got some good opposing angles and lines working all together here. So this works where I was like just super stoked when I saw it, because everything lined up better than I could have expected.
And it works, and I think this one works a lot better in black and white. I don't know if you envision it from the beginning, but obviously with those shadows from the trees and the whiteness of the snow, I think this would work better as a black and white than a regular color.
I definitely saw this as a black and white image, because this is a tree burn. This is like where they had a forest fire the summer before, so all the trees are black to begin.
Oh, so black, yeah.
Yeah, so it was it was natural. It was almost a black and white to begin with, but yeah. So that was a pretty cool experience for sure. And same thing, awesome. I shot 1,000th of a second to freeze the action, F11 to keep everything in focus, and ISO 400's where it all came together. So, and 58 is the 28 to 70 lens, just somewhere in the middle.
Awesome, love this one.
Cool, and I think that's it for images. So
that's the one for images. This was very image heavy and very technical, I think, for those that are still hanging out with us. Do we have any questions for Mr. Markewitz here? I think you can stop sharing his, if that was the last image, you can stop sharing your screen, and let's get you back on. There we go. Let me just double check to make sure any of the participants have any questions still that haven't been answered? If we'll wait for those for a minute or so, but two quick questions of mine. One of them was going to be, do you use any strobes? Have you ever used strobes from a setup environment?
Yeah, I've used strobes for years and definitely have a lot of experience with strobes, and they're great to work with. And I've used them out in the field, hauled heavy battery packs out into the mountains for hours and set them up in all kinds of locations, used them on commercial shoots. And yeah, I've definitely, I love the strobe look and what you can do with it, but it's a totally different approach. I feel like to me, it's much more valuable on commercial shoots. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time with strobes, and could do a whole nother seminar on strobe shots as well. So
yeah. Do you, out of curiosity, in terms of the locations, and you may not be necessarily in as much control, obviously, because you're at the mercy of what's going on with the sun, but do you necessarily favor certain lighting situations, especially when for example, when it's on a ski slope? Obviously it's going to be white, a lot of white. Do you prefer to shoot morning, midday, late evening, or is it sort of a combination of you just kind of continue shooting throughout the day and you adjust as the sun is adjusting around you and the environment's adjusting around you?
That's the thing, no bad light, right? So
right,
shoot any time of day. I'll shoot all day and just adjust according to what the light's doing. I definitely shoot a lot of backlighting. I really like that look and feel, and kind of learning how to balance it out.
Yeah.
I really like the backlit look. It just, creates just kind of
a bit more drama.
A little more drama, and yeah, a little more drama, I guess. But obviously I'll play with side light, front light. Golden hour is amazing. Everyone loves a golden hour, but yeah, my approach is really, you can shoot all day, any time of day. You just need to learn to adapt to whatever the light is doing and make the best use of it.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. What advice do you have for someone that's wanting to get into this industry? Someone who wants to follow in your footsteps and take the next generation of athletes that are doing, whether they're skiers or mountain bikers or surfers, whatever that may be. How do they get into this particular industry?
Well, I think, in any kind of outdoor action sports industry, I think it's really key to work with really, really good, athletes. So if you can get to know some of the top athletes, and, if it's your area or if you're connected in the scene somehow, like that's a big step forward for sure.
Yeah.
It's just, people want to see shots of like the best people. So you got to learn, you got to somehow make your way into being able to shoot, top level athletes. And then I would say, it's great to copy what you've seen and emulate, shots you've seen from other photographers. But I think in the long run, you're going to be you need to learn to create your own vision, your own look. And
absolutely.
I think you do that by experimenting and trying as many new things as you can. Especially, when I first started, I shot on film. So it was to experiment, cost money. Every shot costs.
And you don't know if you got it right for like 3 days.
Exactly. But with digital, there's no extra cost. You can shoot thousands of photos. You can look at them right away. You get instant feedback. So the learning curve is much quicker with the newer equipment. So I think, that you're a lot more open to experiment with new ideas, and whatever that is, a different kind of composition or different kind of lighting, or, just play around with it. And, another thing I used to do is try to find inspiration from other forms of photography, whether it was landscape or fashion or even, food lighting or just things like that, like especially with strobes, like, food photographers are exceptional with strobe lighting, right?
Yeah.
So
and product photographers too.
Yeah, product photographers. So kind of looking at an image and figuring out, oh, how did they light that? What's the direction of that, the rim light, like where would that one be?
Angle of incidence.
Yeah, just figuring out, being able to look at an image and figure out like, okay, how was that lit, or how was that shot, or what could I take from this image to apply to an action sports image,
Right.
So I think just keeping your mind open to, experimenting as much as possible is crucial.
What is the one lens that, if you're going out in the field, you can only take one lens? What would that be? Can I assume it's a 70 to 200?
Yeah, I guess if it was one lens, I had to,
I think that's the go-to for most.
I'd probably go 70 to 200.
It's a favorite for everyone. We do have one question that just came in. Yeah, absolutely. We do, and this leads into the question that that Tracy just sent over to us, and she says, "Can you explain further about nailing focus on moving subjects versus locking focus on an area, tracking subjects, back button photo focus, etc.? She still can't seem to get the athlete in focus." Back button focus, really, that's just a preference. I prefer to have back button focus on my camera. I just don't like pressing the shutter halfway and then pressing it to actually take the shot. I'd rather back button focus first and then press the shutter. So that's just a personal preference that you can make the adjustments in camera. But I think at the end of the day is, and I don't want to answer this for you, I'll answer it, and then I'd love to get your take on it, is really understanding that triangle relationship between your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. And hopefully we covered that pretty well, actually, given the range of subjects and environments that you are in, that sometimes you need to be in an ISO 5000 because I have no light, but I need to keep my shutter speed up. So as long as you remember that you can't take an image that's going to be sharp, handheld, anything under 1/300th, 1/250th, for example. So keep your shutter speed up. That is crucial. And then in terms of tracking it, all these new cameras have fantastic tracking capabilities. Just learn to understand. There are some that do really good panning across. There's some that do some verticals, some that do more continuous. Really understand that camera really well and keep that shutter speed up and understand the relationship with the aperture and the ISO. But that's my side of it. I'd love to get your take.
Well, I've got a few thoughts on focus. One, related to autofocus, the new cameras are really, really good with autofocus, with tracking. But obviously, it's better when the subject's coming straight towards you or straight away from you at a consistent rate of speed. If the speed is variable, like when a skier is skiing towards you, they're actually going in the middle of the turn, they slow down and then they speed up, and then they slow down and then they speed up. So focus tracking you can lose focus tracking a little bit. But generally, if a subject's coming towards you, especially with a long lens, your focus tracking is going to be good. And if you got a camera that shoots, 15 or 20 frames a second, you're going to get shots in focus.
Yeah, you're bound to get one right.
Yeah. But if a subject's going, perpendicular to you and staying in the same focal plane, the key is to find where that focal plane exists. So that could be, if it's a jump and they're jumping straight across the frame, you would focus on the jump and fix your focus. You don't use autofocus, you use manual focus. Or what I'll do sometimes is use the autofocus to fix the point and then go to manual. So I know that I've got that focal plane in focus. So the athlete's going through that frame perpendicular to me. And then, they're going to stay in focus the whole time, especially with a wider angle lens, you've got more depth of field to play with.
Right. And that's assuming, again, that the situation is that they're going in the exact straight line across from you. Otherwise, they're going to be jumping in and out of focus.
Right.
You're only going to be locked and focused more in the center. Left and right of that's going to be out. So I think it's just that. I think ultimately it's just that anticipation, like you said, knowing where that jumper is going to come. You've seen one or two beforehand. They're roughly around this area. Be ready for it. Keep your understand your settings so you can then absolutely nail the focus. If you're
shooting a shot where maybe the autofocus isn't going to work, like they're coming from a blind spot or something and jumping through the air, but that if you know like the trick they're doing or where they're going to be at the highest point, and you can estimate that distance, you can focus on that point and have them go through the frame, and that frame, you're shooting a high-speed motor drive in theory, which is pretty much a requirement for shooting sports. But that frame where you focus is going to be in focus. The early frames might be out, the later frames might be out of focus, but that middle frame that you've focused, where you focus your lens on, that's going to be in focus. And hopefully ideally that's the best point of action as well. So I think keeping that in mind, like using the autofocus when it's effective, switching to manual when you have that, like, when they're going perpendicular to
Perpendicular, yep.
or, or using it to know like where they're going to be in focus and pre-focusing on that point is kind of, 3 approaches. And another thing, obviously, with a wide angle lens, you get more depth of field to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one thing to keep in mind with wide angles is that what's like, if you pick a focal point, what's behind that focal point is more in focus than what's in front of it. Your depth of field, you get more depth of field behind the focal point than you do in front of it. So if you're, say you have a skier coming through the frame, you focus on a point like fairly close, they're going to ski right up close to you. They're going to be in focus, like you're going to have more frames in focus behind that focal point than you will when they pass in front of it. So
right.
Just understanding how your lenses work as well is important.
Definitely. Understanding your gear and settings on your camera are obviously crucial, and practice. You have to keep practicing. Like you said, with digital now, you can just keep going out there, keep making mistakes, keep looking through your work. Why is it not sharp? Make the changes, adapt to the situation, adapt to your lighting conditions, adapt to your environment, and then it's just all coming down to practice. There's a reason why you've been doing this for as long as you have, and I'm sure you make mistakes too. Not all your images come out absolutely perfect. So
we all make mistakes on every shoot. So
absolutely.
But you shoot enough images, and you're gonna get enough good stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately you're looking for just one image. If someone's doing one jump over and over again, you're not going to use 10 images of that. You're going to use just one. That's going to be part of your portfolio, and then you move on to the next thing, and then that's how you build it up through really good, consistent work. So all you need is one good shot. That's what you're working towards, one good shot.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, well, Scott, we're coming to the end of our webinar here, and really wanted to say thank you for your time. We appreciate it immensely to bestow us with your knowledge of what you do. We're going to put some links up for your work so people can go check it out after the webinar. And yeah, if you have any parting words for us, then please let us know.
Awesome. That's, I love talking about my work and, my images and how I shoot them. And if anyone has any, questions that, weren't answered, please reach out. You can send me an email or Instagram, whatever you want to, however you want to reach me. I'm happy to answer any questions you have and, continue the conversation. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. But very much appreciated, and keep up the good work, sir. We look forward to seeing what you do next.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks so much.